In this video, I'm just going to do some planning, some sketching to figure out the progression of my flipbook frames. So I'm starting in Photoshop here, just laid out a file, and I'm drawing out a timeline. It's going to help me map the relationship between the number of frames and the places along that sequence where I want changes to happen. So I'm marking this off with numbering of the number of frames on the top and the number of seconds on the bottom. So we're planning for 12 frames per second. We've got 48 frames total, so we'll have a 4-second sequence. So just make sure I'm saving this file. And in the bottom of the composition here, I've made myself a frame that's the same proportions of what my flipbook is going to be. I'm going to use that space to mark out the compositional changes that I'd like to see along the timeline from start to finish. Now, of course, you could do this completely by hand. You could do this in another digital program. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. The main point is you want to go into drawing your flipbook with a plan. You don't want to just be starting randomly and hoping that the changes line up with what you want as an end result. So giving yourself almost like an outline of compositional changes is a really smart way to work, and that's what we're doing here. So you can see what I'm doing here is just copying each of the frames and placing them along the timeline at the points where I'd like them to happen. So I know that the first frame and the last frame need to be that centered circle that is 1 inch across. So just giving myself a little bit more space on the canvas here so I can organize things. Notice that as I'm making these small frame layers, I'm numbering them according to their places along the sequence. And that's going to help me keep track of them later on when I actually start to draw these out. So I'm just doing a little bit more work here, adding some extra shapes, picking colors. And what I'd like as an end result here is for that gold bar to move across the screen, squash the red circle, and then have the red circle sort of bounce back and fling the gold bar off to the right-hand side of the frame. So just sort of thinking through how I want that to look, when I want that to happen, and again, taking copies of each of those frames and just laying them out along the timeline. So this way, I don't have to make every single frame right now. I'm just sort of doing a rough map of the major changes that I'd like to see happen over the course of this animation. And so again, I'm just thinking through how quickly I'd like these changes to happen, making adjustments on the timeline. So basically, the farther apart 2 frames are, the slower the motion will be. The closer together they are, the faster the motion will be. And I am planning for this principle of animation of squash and stretch to kind of be the main one that I'm exploring with this flipbook. So again, that gold bar is going to squash the circle against the left-hand side of the frame, and then the circle is going to sort of bounce back. So I'm just sort of thinking through how quickly I want those changes to happen. And again, this is one way to think this through. I'm showing it this way in Photoshop because this is also very similar to what you would do if you were laying these out by hand. There are certainly other techniques. For example, using the timeline panel in Photoshop is one, and that's just fine to do as well. Now, one of the sort of key points to pay attention to when we're working with squash and stretch is for the volume of the shapes to stay pretty much the same throughout their changes. So you could see there, I didn't have that circle quite large enough, so I went back and resized it. So that's one of the nice things about, again, doing this style of planning is that we can sort of catch mistakes like that before we actually start executing them in the final flipbook drawings. So I think I'm getting close to in pretty good shape here in terms of the changes that I'd want to happen. Now I'm just making some adjustments to the timing by moving the frames either to the right or to the left relative to one another. You can see I'm renumbering them as I go, and that's going to help me to figure out how to draw out every single frame, the missing ones that are in between. And that's what I'll do in the next video.